have you ever figured out what it was for your parents that you think created that disparity in their relationship with money? Have you ever probed that? Have you ever understood that?
Well,
because it comes from somewhere, right?
Yeah, I think it's a cultural thing. I think across the Indian culture, my parents are from a state in India called Punjab.
Yeah.
Culturally, money is just one of those things, like even in my culture, my religion, like there's this concept called kirat karo, which means earn an honest living. Now, many people have interpreted that, in many different ways of, oh, don't worry about money, don't talk about money. And in the Sikh religion, there's also this big concept of seva, which means selfless service, giving back. And so there's this kind of like real giving aspect, which is great. And I agree with, but many times we overlook the idea of, how about the earning aspect? How do we earn? How do we take care of ourselves? Because the way I look at it is, if you want to be able to fill somebody else's cup, you want to feed somebody else, you have to be able to feed yourself first. And this is a lesson that my grandfather taught me. My grandparents are immigrants, or they were refugees before they came and lived with me. They were refugees because the state of Punjab used to be much larger. 1947, the state was severed. And if you were a Sikh and you were on the west side of Punjab, you had to migrate east, otherwise you were going to be killed. And it was a very brutal, very rough, very bad time. And my grandparents were on the west side. And so immediately they had to leave their homes, leave their lands, leave family members, leave their friends behind, and migrate and run east. My grandfather, I heard this story a lot, and he actually just moved back to America. But when he started the migration process, the process moving east, all he had was a sword in his hand and the clothes on his back. Nothing else. Left all the money, left all the land, left everything behind, even left his parents behind, and started running. And during that process, he got attacked by a mob. And he had to defend himself, and he saw his uncle get killed right in front of him. His uncle got a knife, a sword right to his head, cut his head open in half. And that was the last time he saw him. And now he comes over to the new east side of Punjab, the new India. He lost his shoes along the way, doesn't have a home, doesn't have any family, doesn't have any friends. He's here just trying to figure it out himself, and now has to figure out, how do you make life work? And what he tells me from that time is, poorness is the worst disease. And the reason why is because when you're at that level of poverty, that level of poorness, you can't even think about feeding somebody else. You can't think about helping another person, because the only thing on your mind is, how can I feed myself? How can you feed your family? When that's the only thing that you're trying to do, you can't worry about feeding other people. And that's where, for me, it was, I want to become successful so I can give back to my family, to my parents, give back to my community, and be able to do more things. Money at its core is just a tool. It allows you to do more of the things that you want. If you give a good person money, they have a tool to do more good. If you give a bad person more money, they have a tool to do more bad. So money, at the end of the day, it's just like gasoline. It amplifies whoever you are, which is why we need more good people with money. So now going back to your question of why, I really think it's just a lot of insecurity. If we feel like we did everything right, we're working hard, but we don't have what somebody else has, something must be wrong. They must have done something bad. They must have done something that, we didn't see. So we create excuses, we create smoke screens. But the thing that we don't understand is the financial education aspect, because that is the thing that can make or break your finances. It does not matter how much money you make, what degree you have, who your parents are, where you went to school. None of that matters. It's what you do with the money you make. And this is one of those things that it can be very hard for you to understand unless you actually see it. I was actually just reading a study last week. It said that 7 out of 10 Americans across the board are living paycheck to paycheck. And then it said that 50% of Americans, or just about 50% of Americans making 6 figures or more, are also living paycheck to paycheck. The majority of Americans across the board, doesn't matter the income, are broke. They have little to no savings. They have little to no investments, regardless of how much money you're making. And the reason is not just because of what salary or job or what degree you have or who your parents are, but because of what financial education you have. And none of us are taught a thing about money, which is the craziest thing.
Yeah, I really appreciate you going in that direction, because I think everyone thinks that when we do have a conversation about money, because of our conditioning, it has to be this obsession or it has to be this goal. And you're like, well, actually, it's just about education.
Yeah.
It's just about, you have to make this thing and you're going to do something with it,
Right.
we better learn how it goes in and goes out and where it goes. And even for me, I'm reflecting on my own experience. I interviewed my mum recently, not on the podcast, and I want to do that. But I interviewed my mum recently at a dinner. We were at a dinner for my sister's birthday. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to interview my mum like a podcast guest.
Yeah.
At dinner. And so I started asking her questions. I was like, Mom, like, how did you get your first job? And like, especially I find like Indian, South Asian parents, they don't really talk about, I don't know, at least mine don't. They don't talk about the struggles they went through or the hardships or
you never talk about the problem.
You never talk about the problems. And so I was asking my mom. She told me that she was from Yemen. So my mom was born and raised in Yemen. She speaks Arabic. Unfortunately, she did not teach me, but she's of Indian descent, an Indian origin. And in Yemen, there was a war going on between the people of Yemen and the Brits because the Brits were in control at the time. So my mom said she was studying for her exams while there were Yemeni soldiers on her roof trying to protect Yemen, and they had to study for their school exams. And like, that's what she was going through. And so, and then when she moved to London, she kept her British passport by moving to London at the time because Yemen got its independence. They moved with like £8, which is like $10. Like, you know, and at that time, that's not bad, but it's, I mean, that's practically nothing. And of course, they built up from scratch and, you know, for themselves did really well. But the idea still comes to, we have no financial education.
Yeah.
What are, if you could start with, and we'll dive into each of these deeper, if you could tell me, what are the 3 habits that keep us in that poor or poverty mindset, as you said, and what are the healthy habits that bring us into the wealthy mindset?
Sure. So the 3, I think, biggest bad habits when it comes to money. First, probably the most obvious, I would say, is people following the 2 S's, where you're spending or saving all of your money. You'll never become wealthy if you do that. Number 2 would be you blindly follow the system without questioning the way the system works. And number 3 is you don't understand how money works. So if we start with number 1, the 2 S's, save and spend. Now, it's interesting. If you look at the financial statements for the majority of people in America or even across the world, the way it looks is you make money, you pay taxes, you spend money, and then you wonder where all your money went.
Literally.
And so the majority of people don't have any plan for their money. And that's why the majority of people have little to no savings, and the majority of Americans have little to no investments. Right now, about half of America has 0 investments. And I'm talking about 0 401k, 0 IRA, 0 stock market accounts, 0 real estate investments, 0 gold investments, nothing. And then out of the next half of Americans that have an investment, only half of those have an investment outside of their 401k or IRA. So you have a very small percent, about a quarter of America, working America, that has any investments on their own. When you go back to the saving and spending, we're in a spending culture. America has a consumerism culture, and I joke about this, but the way I like to say it is traditionally Indian people make $1 to spend 20 cents. American people make $1 to spend $2.
Yeah.
Thanks to the help of credit lines of credit. Yeah. This is just the culture that we're in, where it's very okay and normalized to spend money even if you can't afford something.
You don't have it.
And what are you doing? Well, you're spending all your money making everybody else around you rich, but you yourself, you might look rich, but you're actually broke. There's a reason why the owner and CEO of Louis Vuitton is the richest person in the world, versus the majority of people who wear Louis Vuitton are broke. The people who are wearing Louis Vuitton are trying to look rich, and how are you doing that? Well, you're making the owner of Louis Vuitton rich by doing that. And so this is where you got to understand, there's nothing wrong with wearing designer stuff. There's nothing wrong with having nice stuff. There's nothing wrong with wanting nice things, but you have to be able to afford it first. I used to guest teach in Detroit public schools. And when I used to teach there, it's a rough school district. I would talk to the kids about life, motivation and entrepreneurship and money and success. And one of the things that I would ask is, how many of you have a job? Almost all of them raised their hand saying that they had a job. My next follow-up question was, how many of you have a bank account? Nobody raised their hand. So I asked, what do you do with your paycheck? They said, well, we get a physical check, then we go to the liquor store, we get it cashed. The liquor store owner takes 1 to 10%. Then you buy pop, candy, a bunch of junk on the way out. And by the time you're out of the store, you've already given away half of your paycheck. I call it a net zero thinking, where we think in terms of spending. If I have $1,000, I can go out and buy this handbag, this nice thing. If I have 10 grand, I can go on this nice vacation. If I have 50 grand, I can go on and buy this nice car. We think in terms of spending because we think if I have this money, how can I spend it?